Okay, I want to change tack a little bit and talk to you about 4 keys to effective boards. Now, when I talk about this very, very quickly, again, I'm talking about boards, but I'm talking also about church councils in particular. 4 keys. The first one is this: board composition. Who's on it? Now, this is something that you have maybe a little bit less control over than you would have in another organisation. Another organisation where boards, I've been on a board where boards get to choose their own membership. Someone leaves the board, and so the board interviews to have someone new come on, and you're getting the very best person that you can. Church councils don't work that way. They work with the congregation, of course, nominating and voting for the people who are on it. It's very important, therefore, to talk to the congregation about the gifts and skills that are required on the church council. There is a sense by which, of course, anyone who's a member of the congregation can be on the church council. There are some people, it's probably best they're not. And you want to tell the congregation, look, when you're nominating someone, stop and pray and think through, these are the sorts of attributes and characteristics we want, someone who can think for the future. You may want to come to the congregation and say, look, we've got 2 positions on the church council that are free. As we're really aware of who we are in the congregation, we have someone who has, some legal expertise and some theological expertise. We've got a real good future thinker. And you may want to say, you know what we don't have is this kind of person and this kind of person. Now, we don't want to only take those people if God's calling someone else, but we want to say to the congregation, this is in particular the skill set that we would love to see that would help enrich us as a diverse and healthy church council. So can you please, as you're thinking and nominating over the next few weeks, consider in particular that type of skill set, that kind of person in our congregation? Because there's a sense by which, working together and thinking about who's on it is an important part. Again, you don't want to be exclusive in that, except that you don't want to, well, I've probably said enough. You just want to be thoughtful about who's on it and people who want to be on it and people of good character. Number 2, board relations, how you get along with one another. In my experience, this is one of probably the single most important factor in an effective board. Even if you don't have all the skills, there's a sense by which the way you get along, and I'll come to in a moment a bit more detail about how you get along. It doesn't mean that you're just backslapping and happy and you get along as a great chit-chat group. It means that you're able to have tough conversations with people, but how you get along and the way you relate to one another is a profoundly important part of being effective. Number 3, board processes, how you operate. This is very important to think through how you do the meeting. And I'll come and give you some practical things again in a moment, but not just assuming that sitting around in a bunch of chairs and chatting is the best way to do it, but also having a highly formal meeting may not be the most appropriate way. Again, think it through. What's the best way? There are different ways we can operate. Sitting around in lounge chairs after a big meal and a glass of wine may not be the best place in order to make wise decisions and have difficult conversations. But you know what I mean? Breakfast and red cards and blue cards and early in the morning may not. You've got to think through. How are we going to operate here? Are we going to have an idea of... I'm on Mitcham Council, actually, and the way we operate is very, very, very tight and regulated. When a proposal comes up, you get to speak to it only once, and if you've spoken, you don't get to speak again to it. So it's like, wow, that's... and that sounds pretty tough, but I tell you what, I've been in some church council meetings where I wish that rule was in play. It's like, you've spoken to this. You spoke for 5 minutes. You don't need to speak again. Do you know what I mean? Now, do you want to go that way? On a particular issue, you might want to say, you know what, when we're dealing with this particular issue, I know there are lots of opinions and we've talked about this, so we're going to go around the room, we're each going to have an opportunity to say something for 5 minutes, and then we're going to make a decision. You may not want to make all your decisions that way, but for something you say, do we all agree that this is a good way to do this? And it's like, yes, because that'll stop, Bob going on for 10 minutes and that'll make sure Sally speaks, and Sally never speaks because she's so timid. So you know what I mean? There can be a way of thinking through your processes that can help that from time to time. Number 4, stakeholder communication, and I talked about that as well. What you tell and how you're able to communicate with all the other members of the congregation who are the stakeholders in the place. About everything, about what you're doing. And also the communication as a church council is important as well. Thinking through how are we going to communicate between meetings. Is everyone on email? Does that work well? Do we agree that we're going to make some decisions on email? Or do we agree that no, we won't make decisions, just stuff for information? Thinking through how you communicate well, make sure that you don't turn up at a meeting and some decisions have already happened because so-and-so, you know what I mean? You might want to say, we don't talk about church council meetings in the car park afterwards. we have our meeting and then we go home, and if there's anything we want to say, we say it, or we create a Facebook group where we just interact with one another, or we email, or we phone up. Just talking through how you're going to communicate. You might want to agree as a church council that if this or this or this happens with the minister, that the church council agrees to call everyone first before a decision's made. Or what sort of decisions are we happy for the minister to make on their own, and what ones do we think need to come together? What things would be a reason for us to meet for a special meeting and not just to wait for the end of the month? All of those things they all sound like, oh, well, that'll never happen. But of course they do happen. And at the very least, talking them through and being clear about them, make sure that no one gets caught off the hook. And when the worst happens, that you're not stuck.
Tim, with reports which are going to come to church council, some church councils like all the reports to be in a week before, so everyone's got a chance to read.
Yep.
Other people believe that you can walk in on the night and drop a report on and somehow or other go and make a decision straight away. Yep. So they're things that I would have thought you would need to be clear on. I'm not sure whether that's in a board process or a communication sense.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yep. So you want to decide if the minister's bringing a report, or if, let's say you've done a bit of investigation and you're going to make a decision. My general rule is I'm not going to make a decision on something that I've only got the report on that night. And so as a church, in fact, that happens at Mitcham Council, at local government level. There are some things that a report will be written and it will come to us at least 5 days beforehand if we're going to make a decision on it. There are some things that are so important that they have to be discussed and tabled at a meeting before a decision can be made at the next meeting. You're not allowed to make it unless it's been tabled once. Some of them, they need to go to community consultation, then come back and then go to a meeting and then you make a decision. So you need to decide those things. If we're going to get a report, you're handing it to me now. I'm happy to talk about it now in a generative sense, but we'll make a decision next meeting. Or you might say, we can't get the report till on the night, so we're going to push the church council meeting back a week so that we all have a chance to read it all before we make a decision at the meeting. Or you might want to say we're going to meet again in a week's time to make the final decision because we're just going to talk about it here tonight. So you want to think about from the minister. I mean, as a minister, I know you're busy, and I'm notorious for sort of, emailing it off or bringing it to the meeting and saying, this is how we're going. And if you're really just saying this is how we're going, then that's fine. But you can't expect then the church council to make a decision or respond to it immediately on that. So just talking those things through, I think, is just really good, helpful process and allows people, some people, like myself, you read quickly and you make decisions very quickly. Other people, it takes them a while to brew things, and you want to make sure that the wisdom of those persons, who are often is a very deep and good wisdom, it doesn't mean they're slower at thinking. It means that they're processing different elements first, and you want to hear what they have to say, and they may not be ready to tell you what they've got to say until the next meeting. So anyway, that's a really, really fantastic point.
Yeah, we also have an executive.
Oh, indeed?
For certain areas of issues.
Yes.
The executive can decide between meetings and just report.
That's right. Some church councils will have, an executive, just certain members, usually the minister, the chair, and maybe one or two other people who can meet and make certain decisions. And so you can say, we're happy for them to make these decisions in time, but of course those decisions need to be communicated back to the whole church council, and they are generally, there's a limit to the decisions they can make. But that can be a helpful way of, you know what I mean? This needs to be done and we're all in agreement, but we can't vote tonight, and, well, we're happy for the executive to take care of that. Again, there needs to be good communication between the executive and everyone else so that they don't feel like it's the church council within the church council. All right, let me keep going because I've got a bit more to go through, and I just think these are some really helpful things to note along the way. Dysfunctional church council behaviour. The first one is this. You can have the dominant personality, the controlling, over-talkers, inflexible, not listening. This is a person on a church council who controls, they do most of the talking. And it's fascinating to have someone sit there and time how much different people will talk. And it's amazing how you can have one person that won't talk, literally say a word for 3 meetings, and one person will do all the talking. They can be incredibly controlling. This is a dysfunctional church council if that person is allowed to run riot. The second thing could be the caretaker chairperson. That is a chairperson who is ineffective in that they can't work towards consensus. What generally happens is that this person just takes their lead from this person. Does that make sense? But a caretaker chairperson is not a... Sometimes the chairperson can be the dominant person, just bang, 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 and here we go. But often they might be the person who's a very conciliatory sort of person, but another person is almost like the default chairperson, banging things through. And a caretaker chairperson is ineffective if they're not able to pull that person into line, say, no, you've spoken enough, we need to hear from some others, and then try and draw people out to work towards consensus. Say, Sally, you haven't spoken to this, we need to hear from you. No, Bob, we have heard from you. You're going to sit there quietly for a while. So that takes a certain kind of strength to try and enable a win-win situation or consensus around the table. But a dysfunctional one can be a chairperson who's just a chairperson in name only. A third one can be the conformist, which is the nice person who makes no contribution. You know, in the church we like nice people. And sometimes people get voted onto church council because they're just a nice person. But they can be a very ineffective and poor church council person because they're too nice. Because people who are too nice aren't very good at interrogating reality. They're not often good at telling the truth. They can be generous and wonderful at doing many things, but this person, if they're too nice, they don't make a contribution. They sort of assume that whoever's been there longer will probably know more than me. You can have a controller. This is a person who is a negative person who blocks discussion, interrupts others, and rejects first propositions. I can think of a personality in a church council where it doesn't really matter what the idea was, they're against it from the start. They're just against things changing. They are very unfortunate people and very difficult people in a church council and often they are the person the minister will literally lie awake worrying about at night. They'll go to the meeting feeling like, oh, that person is there, and they can be like a dead weight in the meeting because you know you can't, there's no freedom to do anything or say anything because that person's going to be against it. Well, you've got to find a unity. You've got to find a unity past people like that. But just at the other end, you can have cheerleaders. And these are the people that are sort of yay for everything. They're just enthusiastic amateurs. And that is, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, that's a great idea. Sometimes they can be a cheerleader for another person on the church council. In other words, this is the mother duck and that's the duckling. And whatever the mother duck says, this person's just, oh, I agree. Or whenever there's someone to be nominated, I nominate Heather, or whatever it is. But a lot of the time they can just be a cheerleader for whatever happens. And again, they're ineffective in being able to give a critique to things, the very opposite of the person above. And then of course you can have your critics who complain often, manipulate, and are always critical. There's a sense by which the culture of your church council will be shaped by these personalities. And there's a sense by which we'll lean one way or another. You're probably more an optimistic or a pessimistic person by nature. You've got to be aware of that. You've got to talk about that and say, oh, have a candor about the fact that, well, Bob, we know we know you're going to probably not like this, but I want you to say 2 reasons why this could be a good idea before we hear from the thing that you're going to say, you know what I mean, against it. So having a bit of fun about it, if there's safety in the room, can be a healthy way of balancing up some of that stuff. And being aware, are we hearing this negative things because this is a bad idea, or are we hearing negative things because we only ever hear negative things about things that involve changing the worship service? You've got to be aware of those things and be aware of how they can impact upon the minister who may be bringing some things. This is healthy church council behaviour. This does go on. It's wonderful. Healthy church council behaviour is when you have a good conductor chairperson. This is a person who relates well, is a good listener, is flexible, is a clear thinker, is unintimidated, is a servant of the church council, who builds constructive relationships with the minister and can handle a crisis. That's my summary of what I think a good church chairperson can do. Is that you? You might, at least to think about these things and know them. You think you've got to be a person who relates well, because their job isn't just to be focused on the issue, but to be focused on the room, the people in the room, and how. So they've got to be able to say to Bob, you're out of line. And they've got to be able to draw out. So they've got to be looking for who hasn't spoken and all that. They've got to be a good listener, because they need to be hearing what's going on. Not just listening to their own opinion. They need to be deaf. They can perhaps have an easier life if they're deaf. But there's a sense by which they need to hear, you know what I mean, the collective voice. What I'm hearing here is this. And they also need to be able to listen to their own view in proportion to the views in the room. So they need to say, look, this is how I feel about it, but they probably want to hear the room first, because they know that being the chairperson, they probably carry a bit of extra weight in their opinion. So they're like, look, this is my view. However, what I'm hearing is something different to that. And so, you know what I mean? That's a wise person who can do that. They need to be flexible in being able to, I was wrong about that. I mean, we need to do that. They need to do that. They need to be a clear thinker. So not just be consumed by one issue. You never want your chairperson to be the person who's just consumed with this particular issue in the life of the church. They need to have a breadth about what they're able to see across the church. It's very important that they're a person who can't be intimidated. That Bob, I mean, I hope there's no Bobs here, but do you know what I mean? That Bob can't give them the eagle eye, and they're sort of like, whoa. I should have used the name Bruce, shouldn't I? But there's a sense by which, you know what I mean? They need to be a person who can stare. They can't be bullied. They need to stare down a bully. And sometimes they need to stand with the minister in confronting a bully in the church. To say, well, come on, this is a, you know what I mean? Now, they need to be able to have that conversation with the minister, because there are, dysfunctional and strange personalities in our churches. They need to see themselves as a servant of the church council, so they're not here to lead it. They are here to conduct it, facilitate it, or moderate it, if you like. Moderate, of course, is the way we talk about our presbytery chairperson and synod moderator. So there's a sense by which they understand their moderating role, but not just dominating. And they need to build a constructive relationship with the minister. That's profoundly important. They shouldn't just become sort of like one and the same, but they need to be able to have some very frank conversations to one another and have trust there. It's very, very difficult for ministry to continue in a church where the minister and the church council have fallen out. There needs to be a constructive relationship. And so as a church council person, you need to be a person who's able to relate to the minister well, even when you may disagree with the minister, or the minister may disagree with you, but they need to understand their role with the church council. They're not the embodiment of the church council with the minister. They're not them and the minister as buddies in front of the church council. They need to understand the nature and the dynamic of that role and be able to manage it with wisdom. And they need to be able to handle a crisis. This is a person who needs to be a little bit shock-proof, because they're the person who's going to play with the minister a strong role when we suddenly find out that, Mr. So-and-so in the congregation this has been going on, and, well, they need to handle a crisis. Or the minister's wife passes away or something. Well, they can't be a person who's flustered. They need to be a person who can give that steady leadership in the congregation and be able to handle a crisis. And you go, well, this is what we're going to do, and work with the minister, because that we live in a fallen world, in a broken world, and they need to be a person who can handle that kind of situation. I've got a few more. We need change agents. That is, catalysts, future thinkers, optimistic ideas people, out-of-the-box solutions. It's always great to have someone who's just, positive about the future, who comes up with some crazy ideas, and to say, we want you to keep giving us those crazy ideas. Not all of them we're going to adopt, but we want you to be the one who's thinking and saying, what do you see here? What do you think could be an option out of the box for this? They are helpful people on a church council. You also need to have consensus builders, conciliators who have conflict resolution skills. It's very good. I've seen this in teams before where there's a conflict happens And it's not the boss and it's not the church council chairperson, but it's another person who actually just has a pastoral ability to suddenly be the one talking into that situation and make it. You know what I mean? I've seen that gift. It often is a very quiet person in the congregation or on the church council, but their particular gift is being able to help people work together. Everyone loves that person or trusts that person, even if they don't trust each other, and they can have a particular role on that. So it's worth having someone on your church council who is a person who goes, you know what, they are a person who can work with anyone. They're a person that's helpful to have there because when we get into tough things, they'll be able to keep, you know what I mean, the juices flowing in the room and the relationships going. What a wonderful gift. A challenger, that is someone who is deliberate, prepared, direct and fair in the way that they challenge ideas. This is not just the negative person. This is a person who says, you know what, let me play devil's advocate here for a minute and just say, here are some things that I think could go wrong. Now, they don't become the devil, they're only the devil's advocate, okay? So there's a sense by which that person is a helpful person who tests ideas. We're called in the Bible to, test everything and hold fast to what is good. So be a person. You've got to kick the tires on a car before you buy it. So these ideas need to be tested, and that person can be a very helpful person. Let me go back to the dysfunctional church council. This is the signs of a dysfunctional church council. This is, I hope it's not too much of a mirror for the church council that you're involved in, but this is some signs of a church council as a whole that may be dysfunctional. Have a look at this. Does this ever happen? Hurried decisions based on inadequate data. Oh, we don't know everything, but we need to do it. We rush things through. The second one, a culture of indecision. That is, we never seem to be able to make a decision. We spend 45 minutes on the blue flowers or pink flowers for Sunday. There's a very important rule at a church council. You need to talk about the decisions that you won't talk about at church council. In other words, there are some things that you need to say they are management issues. They are not for us. They are not worthy of us. That doesn't matter. That someone else can just you decide, Betty. We don't need to talk about it. And it can be very hard for us as personalities because we like to have an opinion about everything. But you need as a church council to say, you know what, there is a flaw and there are some things under that flaw that we don't need to talk about. We need to, because if we talk all our time talking about those things, we will never talk about the big things. And no one else is talking about the big things. We need to talk about the big things. So you know what, whoever decides the flowers or does this or whatever, it's not on our agenda. I refuse to put it on the agenda because it'll take all our time and it won't help us in our mission. So you can get stalled on decisions with indecision. Cover-ups. Oh, we don't talk about that. Groupthink, where we all just seem to be in unity about every single decision every time and never really talk things through. Everyone's agreeing with one. Or you talk yourself into the fact that this is absolutely the way it is and you're not listening to what the congregation's saying. Congregation, there's things going in here and you're not listening. It's like, no, they're all wrong, we're right, and you hold on and you make that group think. Always focused on the detail, never on the future. Overtly pessimistic. Or, the other way around, utopianism, not accepting reality, but reality with vision. This is an important thing for a church council. You are not there to sit around and go, well, I guess we won't even exist as a church in 3 years. Or you sit around and go, I know there's only 10 of us left, but we're going to be 200 by this time next year. Is for you to say, no, okay, there are 10 of us here. We could close, or we could say, what's God calling us to do? What is he calling us to do? Is it to continue on but do things differently? Is it to combine with this congregation here? Is it, I'm just using that example because it's a potentially pessimistic example. But you need to have a clear picture of your reality, but then with vision for the future. And there are multiple visions of ways you could go. Be deliberate about it. Factions amongst board members. So Ben and Sally always voting the same way. They've had a conversation before they come because, you know what I mean? This person says and that person's nodding. Not good. You need to come. No, it's very important in a church council. No one is there as a representative of a particular element of the congregation. All of you there are to represent all of the congregation as a discerning community together. So sometimes a person says, well, as a person of representing the old timers or representing the worship team, it's like, well, I'm the one, I have to advocate for these guys because no one ever else does. So, no, I'm sorry, you're not here to advocate for anyone. This is not a particular electorate that's elected you. Everyone has elected everyone, and we are here to talk about everyone. Very important. You can't have a faction that's your little corner. That's not part of our understanding of consensus decision-making and governance in the uniting church. Favouring interest groups, and that goes a little bit to what I was saying before, and shadow members. Shadow members is the situation you have where so-and-so, let's say Bob is on the church council, but actually it's Bob's wife who's making all the decisions and has all the opinions. Or it's, it's Jeff. And Jeff would never get elected because, no one likes Jeff, but frankly, Bob is just a mouthpiece for Jeff's opinions. In the legal world, in the corporate world, that's illegal. That's illegal. So if you have a person here, if you have a shadow person and let's say the organisation goes bankrupt and and the board is liable for the bankruptcy, if you can prove that there's a shadow relationship, guess what? Jeff's also liable for the bankruptcy as well. So being a shadow director is a very relevant situation in governance, and you know that it can happen with partners and groups and all that kind of thing. Our time is up, but let me give 2 more minutes. Is that okay, just to go through the healthy signs? I think that might be a good way to finish. The culture of a healthy church council. Firstly is openness. Openness. That is that there's genuine listening for God's direction. Secondly, outcomes are not predetermined. Even if you have a view on a situation, you must go into a church council open to having that view changed. And you need to talk about that. I know some of you feel strongly about this, but for 5 minutes, let's just open up and just wonder. You know what I mean? An honest search for new discoveries. Actually saying, you know what? There are 2 different ways to do this, and we've done it both ways, and it's not working. What's something else? What's a different way? What's a new way? How can we change? What's something else? Let's talk about this for a while because we might discover something we've not even thought of before. And an atmosphere of safety and trust. So there needs to be openness in the church council culture. Secondly, there needs to be candour. This is very important because often in the church we think agreeing and sitting in line with other people's opinions is the right thing, or disagreeing isn't good. But you know what? The recent governance materials talking about the importance of frankness and candour. That is that the good companies, good organisations have boards where people can just say frank things. Now there's respect and there's trust, they're not being abusive, but they can be honest. And they go, you know what, I just feel uneasy about this, I don't trust it. And well, let's take that seriously and look at that. And that's when they find that there's things going on in the organisation they didn't know about. So candour is very important. That is a willingness to speak the unspeakable. Every now and then in a church council meeting, I might stop and say, you know what? What's the elephant in the room at the moment? What aren't we talking about? What's going on? And then you sit and wait, and hopefully there's a person there that says, to be honest, it's the fact that we're broke. I mean, we just can't afford. Okay, that's reality. Let's not be scared of that. The truth sets us free. Now let's talk about what are we going to do from here? Very important, very important. Secondly, or it could be the opposite. It could be, you know what, we've got lots of people coming to church, but I don't think we've had a baptism for 3 years. You know what I mean? It's just, let's be honest. What are we here for? What are we here for? Second thing, expose unfulfilled commitments. That is, we said we were going to do this last year, and you know what? We still haven't done it. We talk about going on a prayer retreat, but we've never done it. We said that we were going to bless our minister, or we said we were going to change, and we've never done it. So that's important. We need to air conflicts which are undermining consensus. We need to stop and say, every now and then you need to stop and say, you know what? We need to stop here because there's something going on between you two, and it's overriding everything we're trying to do. I don't know what it is between you two, but we can't have consensus and make a good decision and good discussion here today while this is still in the air. So we either need to draw this meeting to a close and we're going to have a conversation with you two and sort out what's going on, or you two need to sort it out now over the cup of tea break, or you need to talk about what's going on. Because it's hamstringing us as a group. Real opinions are aired in healthy places. Pocket vetoes do not occur. That is, at the last minute, well, this person, you know what I mean, always pulls out the thing and says, no, well, I'm not voting for this. No matter what you say, I will never, ever, ever vote for this. You can say, wow, okay, well, do you see how you're just stalling it? You're vetoing it all the time.
You just have to record agreement.
Well, that's it. You have to move past. You've got to have a process for moving past that and saying, well, you've been heard, but we're still going to do it. We're not going to be held captive by your opinion. And then elephants in the room are named, and I talked about that before. 2 more slides, I think. You need informality yet clear structure. Informality yet clear structure. That's important, and it's an important balance. As a chairperson, you need to set that culture. Informality encourages the candour that we talked about before, but it ensures the meeting does not just go through the motions. This can be one of those, all this, all in agreement, yes, down, next, yes, in agreement, all down. So being too formal in a funny way can actually mean you just trickle along without actually really talking about things. Just as being too informal can mean you never talk about things properly as well. You need to have a clear structure that makes sure you talk about things properly when that's appropriate. It reduces defensiveness. So people don't feel like they need to make a real big speech when they, it's just like, hey Bob, just tell us how you feel about it. That's okay. You can use ordinary words and we can be honest and candid here. They don't have to be, oh, that's not what I said. It makes people comfortable to genuinely think. That's an important skill. Leading a church council, you want people thinking at their best. Give them time to think. They don't need to have to, it's like, let's think about this for a second. What are you thinking? What are you thinking? It's like, well, can't be rushed or they can't be nervous. They need to be informal and frank so that they can give their best selves, their best thinking. And of course it builds unity because people are friendly with one another and people can be honest with one another. And that's an important thing as well. The closing a church council meeting is a very important skill. What I mean by that is that you don't just get to the end and go, well, that's it, off we go. It's very important that there's clarity. So closure at the end of a meeting, you need to clarify the decisions that were made. This has been a good meeting, everyone. We've made some important decisions, especially number 4. That was a tough decision. That's what we've made. So everyone leaves with a sense of clarity and a sense of achievement about what you've done. Going away and feeling like you've achieved things and it's been good. People know exactly what was decided. That's important. And that's where the minutes are important. So it's like, oh, I thought last time we decided to do X. And it's like, I remembered Y. At the end of the meeting, you need to say, this is what we decided on this. That's important. People know exactly what they're expected to do. Sometimes tasks. We said we agreed that Bob's going to go away, he's going to explore this and he's going to bring us back just a couple of paragraphs on what he found out and he's going to email that and we'll talk about it at the next meeting. Bob, do you understand that's what you're doing? Yep, okay, fantastic. All right, so there's nice and clear. Ensure accountability and accurate records. So make sure you keep your minutes. You need to have an agreement whether are your minutes going to be just the dot point decisions you made or are you going to have someone that gives a good paragraph on how we talked about it and what happened. Talk about what's going to be most appropriate. And sometimes for some things it's appropriate and other things it's just a very quick thing that's minuted. And you need to build it builds the culture of the church council. What I mean by that is coming to the end of the meeting you get to be able to say, guys, we are the church council. Tonight we've met and we've grappled and we've prayed and we've made the decisions. This is an important group. I'll always say that to a church council. Thank you for the service that you give here. We're entrusted with a good responsibility and we've made those decisions tonight. Let's pray and let's go, feeling that we've done what God's called us to do. That's an important thing to do and it helps build the ownership of the church council. I actually have several more slides. Would you like me to continue on or would you like me to stop? What would you like to do? You've got to go? All right, let's call it to a close. I'm more than happy to forward you more information, but there are so many things. Let's call it to a close. May God bless you as you go. We've made some important decisions here today. God bless you as you serve in your church council.